Well, hi, everybody. Welcome to the People Prescription, your dose of people ops wisdom. I'm here today with Danny Hattersley, a financial advisor based in Staffordshire. And today's topic we're discussing is Money Talks, rethinking reward strategy for a multi-generational workforce. Welcome, Danny.
Morning, Rich. Morning, everybody. Just sort of elaborate on what you just said. So we have financial advisor at Nicholson Wealth Management based in Newcastle-under-Lyme. Nice to be here, Rich.
It's great to have you. So for those of you who are new to the podcast, just to give you a flavour of what we're talking about today. So we're looking at different ways in which to engage with workforces around their financial well-being. So I've had 20 years in HR and people operations, and today we're going to go through aspects of the cost of living crisis that people are feeling at the moment, what employers can do from a financial well-being perspective. And we're going to discuss with Danny, who's an expert in this area, about what kind of options are available for employers to engage with their workforce on finance and how they can support their employees with their sort of financial objectives. So Danny, first and foremost, why do you think financial well-being isn't just a nice to have anymore, that it's actually something that's quite important for keeping employees engaged in the workforce?
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of research done in this area over the last few years, and some of the statistics are frightening in terms of, money being one of the biggest worries people have in life, being able to pay bills. But that has a knock-on effect into work life then, doesn't it? It's not just the home life. When they're worrying about money, it affects the work life, which then affects businesses.
100%. Yeah. I mean, I see this constantly. Over the years that I've done this, if you'd have asked me sort of 15, 16 years ago, what was the main reason for people taking time off if they're unwell, I would have said it was a bad back. Over the last 5 to 6 years, I've seen a huge increase in stress-related absences, people's mental health. And a lot of that can be driven, when you peel back the layers of the onion in terms of the reasons why people are taking time off. It can relate to financial stress. It can relate to the impact of the cost of living. So today's podcast really is about sharing some wisdom based on your years of experience as a financial planner to help employers support their employees with their financial goals, and also from a HR perspective, what we can do as employers to create the right environment for people. So financial stress is a HR issue, but it's not just a private problem that individuals can have. We can support those individuals, not only through wages, that's just one part of the picture. Employees are dealing with rising rents, they're dealing with childcare costs, planning for retirement. It really bleeds into their productivity from a HR perspective. So if we can support them with their financial well-being, we can also support them with their health and potentially even absence levels as well. The average amount of sickness days lost in the UK at the minute is just over 6 days. So from an employer's perspective, that's a huge amount of productivity that can be lost, if they're unwell. So this is one of the reasons that can potentially drive absence, which is why I think today is going to be really useful for the audience to understand, okay, well, what options are available for employers? How can they support their employees when it comes to their financial well-being, and perhaps how you can enhance that picture for them as well, Danny?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a big thing for me, certainly, being in this industry, is a lot of people think, I need to have a lot of money to see a financial advisor and get any advice. And, and ultimately that's certainly not the case. But also we need people there who are willing to just offer some help to those who need it most and just give some guidance.
Yeah, 100%. So with that in mind then, in terms of hot topics, things that you focus on a lot at the moment, we've had other podcasts and guests on where we've spoken about generational expectations. And I'd be curious to understand how that impacts on the different generational differences where it comes to what people are focused on. So from an employment perspective, where you've got a different mix of generations working within the workforce, I'd imagine that the Gen Z or millennials, Gen X, boomers, they have different requirements when it comes to financial well-being. So what are your thoughts on this? How can an employer potentially support those different generations and the impact of perhaps financial stress on their performance, absences? We spoke about, the impact that can have on absence. But from a retention perspective as well, I mean, from a HR point of view, I always suggest to my clients that, a happy team is a productive one. And the way I see employees engaging with people like yourself is that actually feeds into that. If an employer is offering support packages that creates a situation where employees believe that they're being taken care of, there's an aspect of certainty for them as well, so they understand what support's available to them. that can actually create a happier workforce, which ultimately means from an employer's perspective, their bottom line increases as well because people are more productive. So how would you address that from a financial planning perspective, from a generational expectations perspective? So if we perhaps focus on, Gen Z initially and work through millennials, Gen X and boomers, and, what sort of support's available from a financial perspective for those generations?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, like I say, if we start from the Gen Z, the younger generation, I think one of the big worries that they have, perhaps worries maybe not the right word, but the things they're thinking most about is property, isn't it? Just started working, trying to save a bit of money, trying to still enjoy themselves while they're young, but also in the back of their mind, they're thinking, oh, I would like to buy a property at some point. And we've seen where the way property prices have gone over the last 10 years. So the deposit is now becoming more and more
Absolutely.
that they need. We're certainly seeing sort of family members trying to help out more in terms of gifting deposits, etc. So for those sort of Gen Zs, it's working with them to make an affordable savings plan, I suppose. Bit of budgeting. How can we budget a bit better if we put a certain amount away each month? And where do we put that? What will that look like in 3, 4, 5 years' time? Simplifying things, making small steps.
And are you finding that people are focusing their attention on that aspect of budgeting, or is it something where they need encouragement to just to give it the time of day that it needs in order to achieve their financial objectives, like buying a house?
Yeah, I think a bit of both, in all honesty. Doing this job, we meet various different people and tend to find that we either get people who are spenders or we get savers. There's sort of never seems to be much in between.
I'm with
So
you.
some do need a bit of encouragement. A lot of people think, well, I can't save, or a big thing that I find is people always say, I'm going to save what I don't spend at the end of the month. But we all know, I always say to anyone, life happens and we end up spending, we end up treating ourselves to that extra thing because we got the money there. The key thing for me is when you do saving is treat it as a direct debit.
Right.
Save it as soon as you get paid, get a direct debit going into a savings account. And ultimately, over time, you'll forget that you're even doing it.
So make it as easy as
Yeah,
possible for them to save.
absolutely, absolutely.
Excellent. That's a really good tip, actually. So if Gen Zs are out there thinking about, okay, well, how can I save for a deposit? Perhaps looking at some kind of automation, like you say, the direct debit piece, it'll just make it as simple and as frictionless as possible to put something away every month without thinking that you've got to actively try and save that amount of money. There's a lot of stereotypes out there at the moment around different generational approaches to work. And I'm not trying to tar everybody with the same brush on this, but it seems like there's a narrative, a bit of a story around Gen Zs perhaps not being as comfortable with delayed gratification. So the view that I'm taking on this is, of course, there are always going to be people out there that are perhaps more comfortable with saving. But when it comes to trying to encourage people to really sort of put that time aside, have you got any sort of handy tips and any stories that you can share with us where you've spoken to somebody who's perhaps a bit younger, somebody who's a millennial or a Gen Z, that a success story where they have took some money away and they've been able to buy a house or perhaps get that big holiday that they're looking for, and how you've enhanced that picture for them?
Yeah, absolutely. A big thing I'll talk to clients about in terms of property saving is lifetime ISAs.
Right.
So, you can put up to 4,000 a year into lifetime ISA, but the government will give you a 25% bonus on that as long as it's used to purchase a property. So just small little wins like that people don't use or don't know about can make a massive difference. So went to see a client last week, and he mentioned his son was earning some decent money and wanted to do something with it. And one of the conversations we had was, was it a property that he was looking to do? And ultimately, yes. So I said, well, lifetime ISAs is the way forward. And I gave him, there's a website that we use, Money Facts, and that'll give you all the best sort of savings rates, and sort of pointed him in the direction of that and said, have a look at who's offering the best rate and also make use of the government bonus that you can get on that.
Excellent. Yeah, that sounds brilliant. So from a millennials perspective then, just flipping the script slightly, what would you say are some of the things that are perhaps top of mind from a financial planning perspective for millennials, or perhaps, Gen X? Are we talking about savings, family costs? I mean, how are you finding that employers currently are addressing that financial need?
Yeah, I think the sort of certainly millennials, they tend to be, starting families now, and sort of the costs that involved in that. We've both got children, Rich. I'm sure we're both well aware how much that they cost. So they're worried about that. And perhaps I think one thing that people don't consider enough, certainly that them age gaps, is protection and sort of, income protection or protecting the family, because ultimately you're leaving behind, if something happens to you, you're leaving behind some young ones who will always need looking after. So I think that's a big thing with the millennials.
And in terms of options available, so where can yourself or, when you're working in collaboration with an employer, how can you connect the dots for those generations when it comes to their sort of financial objectives?
Yeah, ultimately for me, and a lot of this stuff we're talking about today is I like to provide workshops. We've already touched on the different age demographics, worry about different things. So we've got different workshops that run, giving a bit of advice and a bit of guidance as to say, well, this is available. These are the things you should be considering, and just a bit thought provoking for people.
Yeah, and I think those workshops are fantastic. I've seen some of the content that you've put together and that you've shared with employees locally in Staffordshire. And from a HR perspective, the key thing when we're looking at people, it's about making sure that those people are comfortable in the work that they're doing, that they're productive, essentially making sure that those golden geese are laying egg after egg after egg. And the impact that these kind of measures, these kind of incentives can have on employers and their employee workforce, it reduces financial stress, it enhances performance, it reduces absence levels as well, and it improves retention. And I think, when it comes to, I'm a big believer in thinking outside the box. Employees, that they're there to earn a wage, they're there to make sure that they're providing for their families and achieving their objectives. It's really important that from an employer's perspective, that you've got some form of initiative. And that workshop that you mentioned there, it's free, like you say, for employers. And it's a great way for them to test the temperature of the team around, okay, well, what's their appetite for this as a workforce? Do they need support and assistance? And more importantly, it builds a psychological safety net for that team, as far as I'm concerned, that allows them to perform at their best. It reduces the stress, it reduces the absence levels. So if anybody's interested in connecting with you on the workshops, we'll certainly share some details on the back of today's podcast so they can connect with you and get that organised as soon as possible.
Like I sort of mentioned earlier, for me, it's people don't know where to turn to just ask some of these questions. So the aim of some of the workshops is being a face and being able to, people can say, oh, I've just got this question and just want a bit of guidance, and, we're happy to provide that.
So when we're looking at baby boomers in the workplace, I mean, one thing, again, from a HR perspective, the government many years ago changed the rules around retirement. So there used to be many moons ago, if you'd have asked me 15, 16 years ago, could you retire somebody? I would have said yes, give them a gold watch. Thank you very much for your service. And they move on to the next chapter in their life. What we've seen since the government abolished the default retirement age of 65 is that baby boomers, Gen X, they're working a lot longer. And with that as well, they're changing their retirement preparations. We've got an aging workforce, lots of mature people, which is fantastic as far as I'm concerned. There's a wealth of knowledge available in that generation. But at the same time, it's really important, in my view, to let those individuals know what financial objectives are they looking to achieve and how can you enhance that picture for them. So from a Gen X, from a boomer's perspective, what sort of options are available for them, Danny, from a financial perspective?
A big thing that we get doing it as people get into the 50s and then starting to think towards retirement. There's probably an argument to be said that they should have perhaps thought about it 20 years earlier, but, it's got a lot of other things going on. I appreciate that. So big thing is obviously, I think the statistics at the minute are that, a job expectancy, people staying in jobs is around about 3 to 4 years. So as you can imagine, certainly with pensions and retirement, there's a lot of pots being left around from various different employments. So that's one of the things we can help and support with, is just to sort of try and track down and find out where these pots are. And then the bigger picture for me is, and I always say this, it's starting with the end in mind. When is retirement for you? What does retirement look like? And that can be, we try to put a monetary value on it, or people perhaps call for a monetary value on, but they can sort of elaborate in terms of what they want in retirement. So it might be a few holidays a year. I'm quite happy to pot around in my garden and just enjoy winding down a little bit. So, trying to think with the end in mind and sort of work backwards. Well, we've got this many years to get there. So what can we be doing to get to that point?
Just thinking about within my my network, I know quite a few boomers that have perhaps had several jobs in the time that they've been in work. So they could potentially have several different pension pots that are all in different places. So would it be valuable for them to have a conversation with a financial planner to see if they can sort of amalgamate or bring those together in a way that's working for them? Is that useful?
Yeah, I think for me, it's not always the best advice to bring everything together in one pot.
Right.
You know, it can be certain guarantees that you don't want to lose, but
Yeah.
ultimately just having a conversation with someone and finding the information out puts you in better stead to know, well, and I've got this here, I've got this here, I've got this here. I know what they're going to provide me. There's various different pension schemes around. There's
Right.
the old defined benefit schemes, which is the guaranteed pension for life. And that boomers, a lot of boomers will perhaps have an element of that scheme, but then there'll be elements of the new style, the sort of auto enrollment. So,
I'm with
it
you.
can get very complex quite quickly. So just trying to take check of what you've got, really.
Another thing I was going to ask as well. So, from a Gen X perspective, what I'm finding is there's a lot of questions and inquiries around the type of health cover that can
Yeah.
be available for them. So, from a health cover perspective, I mean, employers, I appreciate, they might look at some kind of PMI. They might even look at some other forms of insurance. What other options, Danny? Like, so if somebody was approaching you from an employer's perspective and saying, look, I'm interested in doing something for our employees that's going to help them with
Mm.
their health journey, what could an employer do to enhance that picture for employees? Perhaps Gen X, like we said before, they might have a few niggles health-wise to give them a bit of peace of mind that they're being taken care of.
Yeah, you've sort of just highlighted a big one, and it's certainly the trend at the minute is private medical insurance. I think a lot of people are concerned about the NHS and wait times for if they've got any issues. So we see more and more people wanting to take forward private medical insurance just to cut down that wait times. And ultimately, I suppose as a business, if you've got a group PMI policy in place and somebody's not so well or has an injury, you would hope that they would get the better treatment a lot quicker than wait for the NHS. So ultimately, it gets them back in work healthier and quicker at the same time.
Excellent. So hopefully, folks, for those of you listening, we've given you some options there across different generational aspects of the workforce, how they can potentially, from an employer's perspective, how you can actually support those employees within those different generations. And you found that useful. If you do wish to continue the conversation, I'll be sharing some information as well around how you can connect with Danny and myself in terms of how we can address that people strategy from a financial perspective. But it's incredibly useful what we've just shared there in terms of employee engagement and how to keep your best people, folks, which is what this is all about from a HR point of view. From a reward strategy perspective, then, one thing that I do get feedback from employees is they're not always sure about what actually lands with the workforce. It seems, again, there's like a narrative where employees are concerned about, okay, are we offering perks versus purpose? Are we rewarding what people actually value? And the CIPD did a study into this, and over 40% of employees don't actually understand or use the benefits that are available to them. Now, I see this quite a lot when it comes to things like employee assistance programs. So for those of you who are not aware, employee assistance programs are there to support employees through mind health challenges. It could be even fitness goals as well. And it's typically something that's offered through a virtual platform or online through over the phone advice. And sometimes when we unpack it, employees come back to us and they share that perhaps the information isn't as personalized or it's not as values led. They feel that it's perhaps a bit fluffy. And it would be useful from a financial well-being perspective to understand a bit more around, okay, well, what's attractive to employees? How can that help with things like retention and engagement of people? So over the years that you've done this then, Danny, what would you say are some of the reward strategies that actually land with employees that employees can offer to their team?
I mean, there's various options in terms of benefits that employers can put in place for employees. But I think
Yeah.
you hit the nail on the head there. I think a lot of times people will have benefits in place, but not really have any idea what they are or what the benefit to them is. And ultimately, that's then a waste of a reward. Ultimately, there's various different options which we can go through. But
Mhm.
for me, the key to it all is you put something in place, but then telling them and then making them understand this is in place. This is why we've done it. And this is what the benefit to you is to do it.
So it's an educational piece as well for
Absolutely,
them.
yeah. Absolutely, yeah. For employers, the sort of least expensive, I'll say, is group life insurance. It's a life insurance for all employees within the business, and that can be set up on it as a set amount in terms of related to everybody's salary. So I've recently done one of these for a local company. We've had the conversation. I've said to you, look, I'm happy to do it and I'll set it up for you. I said, but what I want to do is I want to come in and have a sit down with the staff. And I said, we can do it in two lot sittings. So you're not got all these staff out at once. We can go through it and say, right, this is what the company's put in place. They want to look after you. They really appreciate everything you're doing. It's the benefit to you as employees so that they understand what that is for them then.
So drawing on my experience, I used to manage a team of business partners. Within that team, there was people who were going through difficult challenges at home, difficult challenges with cost of living crisis. And the way I'd address that would be within one-to-ones. For drawing on a real case study, a well-timed one-to-one with your team members, or offering a workshop that can offer genuine advice around how they can plan for, it could be retirement as we've spoken about, or it could be any other sort of financial goals. It has a massive impact on things like employee engagement, reducing turnover within the workforce. It also helps as well where we're not necessarily separating the financial well-being with the performance conversations. 9 times out of 10, over the years that I've done this, what you tend to find is that you'll have somebody who is an incredibly good worker who, in their own personal life, they go through a challenge, and that can have a huge impact on performance. So creating an environment for people where they can share that information, perhaps in a one-to-one. From a management perspective, it's a really good platform to actually offer these kind of perks or present that reward strategy to the team in a way that lands. So again, it's about practicality, offering those practical options. So from a practicality perspective, you mentioned there about group life, but what other options are available to employers so they can actually weave this into their engagement strategies?
Yeah, absolutely. So, there's a lot of different health covers available that employers can take out on a group basis. So private medical insurance we touched upon earlier in the podcast. So you can do a group private medical. You've got income protection, so group income protection. So if people are off staff, you can maintain paying them. And a big one at the minute that's come to the front, certainly since national insurance contributions are due to go up imminently, is salary sacrifice. So people giving up an element of their salary for it. Technically, it's called a non-cash benefit. This can be cars, can be one on that. There's various different schemes. We're a big one we find at the minute, certainly in my line of work, is pensions.
It's interesting. So that could potentially help employers reduce their national insurance burdens.
Correct. How it works logistically is you reduce your sort of salary by a certain amount. Your employer agrees to pay that into your pension on your behalf. And in turn, obviously, you reduce your salary, which would be reducing anyway because you'd be paying personal pension contributions.
Right.
Which in turn, salary's less, so national insurance contributions are less. So ultimately, if it's done correctly, more money in employers' pocket.
And that's something you can help employers and employees.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, with national insurance imminently going up, this is a conversation we're having more and more at the minute.
It's fascinating. I mean, from a strategy perspective, as a business owner myself, I'm always trying to find ways that we can find the win-win. And that sounds like a really useful win-win scenario. So both employer and employee get a huge amount of benefits from it as well. So we've spoken a bit there about what employers can do from an employee perspective. I'm also speaking to a lot of employees at the minute that are interested, especially startups, they're interested in offering equity to employees who are going to become a big picture for that organization as the startup grows, as it gets traction. And from a shareholder perspective, I know from a financial planning point of view, it's really important to look at, okay, well, what kind of shareholder protections available? So as a financial planner, what are the options available to directors and business owners if they're interested in giving employees a bit of equity in the business, or how they can protect that equity?
Yeah, I've done a lot of this since I've been doing this job, really, is shareholder protection. It might be a business has got, 2, 3, 4 different director shareholders within the business. And ultimately for them, that, plan is to grow the business and at the point exit at some point and retire on that. But I would say to anyone, what if something happens, along the way? What's the contingency plan in place for the business? If one of the shareholder passes away, for example, then his shares may pass to spouse. Right. So spouse then could become active member of the business. And I'm sure that the other shareholders wouldn't want that to be the case. So in terms of shareholder protection, that just provides them with the money to effectively buy the shares. And with the correct paperwork in place, it's an obligation, not an option. So everybody is sort of looked after. The other fellow director shareholders, get control of the business then, and obviously spouse then gets the reward as well for that.
I'm with you. So one of the things I always enjoy about our conversations, Danny, is that you can break things down. So you don't use jargon, which I think is excellent. Again, that's in line with my view on things. We try and keep it as simple as possible. because these are quite complex
Yeah.
schemes that we're
Yeah.
talking about too. So they require an additional, conversation with you. But from your perspective, what would you say is working well at the moment from a reward strategy perspective, where employers are discussing or considering utilizing your support? What's working well in real workplace terms? What are the schemes that employers are utilizing
Yeah.
to benefit their teams?
So I think we've just been a few of them in terms of life
Yeah.
insurances. They can be, good incentives for staff and sort of added bonus. But yeah, I'm going to come back to the workshops again, Richard. It's not just financial rewards a lot of the time for the staff. If you've got, me, for example, if I'm providing a retirement workshop for the boomers or the Gen Xs, then they think, well, the company's looking after me. They've got my interests at heart. And in turn, that can improve performance. I know a lot of business owners I've been speaking to, one of the biggest issues they're finding is recruiting or losing staff. And I think sometimes you've just got to try look to what can you do, what can you add to your offering. It's not always money.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I can certainly vouch for that. And recruitment's a huge challenge at the moment for many organizations. And, when we're speaking to applicants, when we're speaking to employees, actions speak louder than words. And, when we look at, okay, well, what actions have the employer put in place to look after the employee's financial well-being? If perhaps the strategy of the business isn't married up correctly with what they're saying in an interview, employees become aware of that. So from an attrition point of view, if they're going to lose somebody, then it's a lot more likely that where the strategy doesn't actually match what's shared in an interview or what's shared in a job description, they're a lot less likely to stay with the employer in the first place. And I think one of the biggest challenges employees are facing at the moment is finding good talent, finding people, keeping the best people as well. And, there's an aspect of, because of the climate we're in economically, people are holding on. If they're considering a job move, they might not necessarily do that currently because of what's happening in the economy. So there's, in my view, what we're talking about today is a fantastic way to differentiate your business from another business down the road, perhaps that doesn't offer these kind of schemes. So it's a great way for you to attract the best talent within your workforce as well. So again, if anybody's interested in how to develop a reward strategy, connect with us. We'd be more than happy to support you with that too. Right. So in terms of like one of the pieces of, shall we say, pushback that I get from a lot of employers is that employees feedback and say that they don't really understand the benefits that are available to them. And they don't really get it. It's not a benefit, or is it a benefit? From a HR perspective, I think it's really useful to offer a bit of more like bite-sized education chunks, line manager toolkits, and addressing really what's in it for me mindset that everybody has. Storytelling makes a huge difference when it comes to disengaged workforces. You tend to find companies that offer a bit more of a narrative, a bit more of a storytelling option to the teams. It allows them to build what would be a loyal workforce because communication's key. And one of the things that I find happens a great deal, certainly from a CEO's perspective, is that 40% of your time as a CEO, if you're an owner of a business, 40% of that time is repeating yourself constantly. Yeah. Now, that's a good thing in my view, because what it shows is that you're focused on it. It shows that you're building up that understanding within your team. But I always use the analogy of a gym. If you go into a gym, if you want to build the muscle, you've got to get those repetitions in when you're using the weight. And, a lot of company owners, a lot of business owners that I speak to, they can become a bit frustrated that they're constantly repeating themselves. And the way I frame it is that actually that's a good thing. It shows that you're building the muscle, you're making the muscle stronger when it comes to what that focus point is that you're repeating. But from an employee's perspective, it keeps it top of mind as well. So from a financial well-being perspective, what options are available? How can you enhance that picture for a business owner when it comes to getting their reps in, building some repetition up around the options available for them and how to educate them?
Yeah, absolutely. There's statistics on, to become an expert in any one subject, you have to do the same thing around about 70 times, I think, isn't it?
Right. Okay. That's interesting.
I think that fits for any line of whatever you're doing. It takes your body or your mind just needs constantly reminding of some things for it to sort of stick and become that practical. So, we've got the workshops that we do. I always say to anybody, for me, they're not just one-off and we'll do it and see you later, trying to incorporate that into the package to staff. So every 12 months we can offer this or, because you've got turnover of staff, like we've just said, I can go through I have clients who've had for years and years, and I'll tell them something 1 minute, and, they still don't understand it the next time I see them. So you've got to be repetitive with these things.
I'm with you. So if people are wondering as they're watching this podcast, from a people strategy perspective, the reason why we're focused on financial well-being today is that it links back to retention, it links back to loyalty within the workforce, it links back to your culture as well. So if you're an employer that's offering this kind of information out to the teams, then it's incredibly useful in terms of keeping your best people. So you mentioned about the financial well-being workshops, the bite-sized sort of no pressure education. But if somebody wanted to, if you've shared something today, do you also offer like a one-to-one follow-up with personal advice for those people?
Absolutely. Finances are personal to every individual, aren't they? His financial situation is completely different. What I'll usually do in terms of the workshops is I'll run a workshop, and then I'll always sort of book myself, just say to the employers, look, I'm happy to stay around for an hour or so if people want 10 minutes with me just for something a bit more personalised. If they've got a personal question, we can do that. And then on the back of that, we can always book a follow-up, no obligation meeting as well on that.
And, from a business strategy perspective, if we just move slightly away from the people aspect of things, you do tend to find with businesses that are incredibly adaptable that they survive difficult periods of time economically, operationally. So this kind of offering is a great way for you to sort of feed into, as a business owner, that adaptability piece, because you can personalize the advice with those one-to-ones, but at the same time, you can also provide a bit more of a support mechanism for your team through the workshops initially too. So I think that's a fantastic initiative.
Yeah, absolutely. I think traditionally businesses took out a lot of stuff in terms of employee benefits,
Yes.
but never told anybody particularly about it. So I think there's probably a lot of companies out there who've got stuff in place, but employees probably got no idea what it is or how to access it.
Right. So as you can see, folks, we've covered quite a lot of ground today in terms of financial well-being. And as you can see, it's not only about the benefits, it's about the retention tools that this offers. It's about building a great culture within your workforce so people understand there is that psychological safety that we're building up within your organization. And there's clearly some commercial advantages as well, especially when Danny was talking about those NI contributions and the salary sacrifice piece. So final thoughts from a HR lens, folks. It's really important, I find, to look after your team, because a team that's looked after is a productive team as well. And this is all about keeping your best people, as it is also about attracting the right talent within your workforce. If this is something that you'd like to continue the conversation about from a HR lens perspective, I can support organizations with their reward strategies. We can build up what would essentially be a job evaluation scheme. So that's where we can create a ladder for an employee to work up towards in terms of the way they structure their business and how that impacts on their pay as well. So that's a great way to engage with people. If people understand how they can work through an organization and go through different grades of pay, that's essentially what job evaluation is all about. It's about creating that ladder for them so they understand that at different levels of the ladder or different steps of the ladder, how that impacts on their pay if they're taking on more responsibility. And it gives them a really clear view of what the destination is within that organization. That's a really great way to engage with your team. From a financial perspective though, Danny, any final thoughts from your point of view?
For me, I'd encourage, a lot of businesses to look down, the financial sort of well-being route. Because I think, like we mentioned at the beginning, a lot of things people worry about now is money. So how can you support your employees and your teams to give them a bit of a clearer mind in terms of that? So I'd certainly encourage, whether it's me or somebody else in the industry, I'd certainly encourage people to reach out and see what we can offer.
Excellent. And we'll include within the links below an option for you to reach out to Danny or myself if you need any questions that are specific answering around the topics that we've covered today, folks. You've been listening to the People Prescription, your dose of HR wisdom and people strategy ops. Great to meet you today, Danny. It's fantastic to have the conversation as always. In terms of next steps, if anybody wishes to follow up with you or get a one-to-one booked in, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, thanks for having me on, first of all, Rich. I'll attach sort of a QR link so it comes direct to me so you can reach out to me. If any businesses want to just have an initial conversation in terms of see what these workshops look like, we can go through that. And I will also look to, over the next couple of months, do a generic workshop at a sort of a neutral venue. And I'll post that all over the socials where to get that arranged. So anybody is welcome to come and attend.
Excellent. And are you on LinkedIn? Can somebody connect with you on LinkedIn?
Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn. So if you just search for me, so if you search Danny Attersley on LinkedIn, I am on LinkedIn. So yeah, you can get me on there.
Amazing. Well, enjoy the rest of your day, folks, and look forward to our next conversation, which is all about neurodivergence in the workplace. So just give you a bit of a teaser for the next topic. We're going to look at that as part of the next podcast.